Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Adam Goodman, partner at Ballard Partners. Adam, thank you so much for coming on.
Gosh, I wanted to be with you a couple days ago, and now a couple days have passed, and the world has changed all over again.
I know, and think about where the world was the last time you and I spoke. We spoke right before the first presidential debate, and wow, has everything changed since then. Since President Biden's disastrous debate performance, he dropped out of the race. Vice President Kamala Harris is now the likely Democratic nominee. And in between there, former President Trump survived an assassination attempt. So a lot of unprecedented historic events thrown at us in just a few weeks. But let's break down the most recent one first. President Biden last night addressed the nation a few days after he decided to step down. What did you think of his speech?
Well, I think it was kind of predictable. It was very political. Went on for a little over 10 minutes. It was good to see the president up and at him again, frankly. I think all Americans are cheering for him on that front. There was no new ground. In fact, I thought what we were all looking for wasn't provided. We were looking for what the rationale was, Mr. President, for you not seeking a second term, but still serving as president. And all he got to in 10, nearly 11 minutes of this address was, I'm passing the torch onto a younger generation. Well, about a week ago, Brittany, you were asking the president, was he ready to hand the torch to anyone else? The answer was no. They were holding hard and steadfast to him, marshaling through this entire campaign. So I think that was very weak and unsatisfying for a lot of Americans, that, as an excuse for why he's not seeking a second term. So maybe there's that letdown. He was the normal Biden. You had a couple of stumbles and a couple of moments where you were saying, oh my gosh, just get through the sentence. But generally, I think, looked good visually, which is important, I think, for the country. Obviously, he pledged himself to doing unfinished business for the rest of his term. And then he tried his best to pass the torch to Kamala. So I give it a C, maybe, in terms of what it could have been, maybe what it should have been. But of course, that's now being supplanted by the campaign.
What do you think should it have been? Because it seems from reporting, from what he said from the debate on up until last week, hey, I'm still going to be running. I'm running. I dispel any of that reporting that I'm even thinking about stepping down. He drops that statement really out of nowhere on Twitter on Sunday afternoon, sending everyone into a scramble. He doesn't address his health. He doesn't address any mental acuity concerns. What do you think he should have said?
I think he should have been more direct and honest. And maybe 50 years into public service, it's a harder thing for you to do, to square with the American people. All he had to say, Brittany, was, look, I gave it my all. I thought I still had enough in the tank to not only go another 4 years as president, but to get through this campaign. He just should have squared with us, and he didn't. And he said nothing, of course, about his health. And there have been rampant rumors, certainly in Washington, not limited here, about whether or not there was something more serious going on. Well, I guess that's been going on for a while, those rumors, but especially in the last week. I mean, I was hearing that, my gosh, he might be sharing something much grimmer about his own personal health, et cetera, which would have been a whole nother kind of a takeaway from last night. None of that was shared at all. It's like, hey, I'm fine, but I'm just not good enough to run this in this campaign, and I'm passing the torch to the new generation. In that regard, I think Americans who are looking for an average Joe kind of presentation from Joe Biden were left underwhelmed.
So now the likely Democratic nominee is Vice President Kamala Harris. She's seen historic fundraising numbers since Joe Biden dropped out just a few days ago. She's seen this excitement from Democrats that we haven't seen in Biden's reelection campaign. She's getting Gen Z support on social media. What do you think of her as the likely nominee?
Well, the first couple of days, everyone talks about it's the honeymoon, and that's a good way to describe it. Coming out of the box, I think there was great relief, Brittany, that among Democrats in particular, that Joe Biden had thrown in the towel. Incredible relief. And compared to what they were facing with the president, anyone, including Kamala, was a breath of fresh air. So she's getting the benefit of that. What was a little surprising was that the Democrats so quickly coalesced, because there was all this call, as you were reading and hearing, Brittany, right, about we got to have a process. That was Nancy Pelosi. That was Barack Obama. We got to go through a process to get to the nominee. We're just not going to make it a coronation. It became a coronation in like 72 hours because I think the bottom line calculus was, look, we have little calendar to play with. All sorts of risks are involved in bringing this into a complete scrum among Democrats for the nomination. And I think wiser heads prevailed and said, good or bad, for better or worse, it's going to have to be Kamala.
And to your point, this does seem to be like a honeymoon phase. But let's dive into the numbers a bit and the facts. And let's start with 4 years ago when she ran for president in 2020. She dropped out before Iowa even began. So not a single primary vote was cast for her in that election. And now we're looking at her approval ratings as vice president compared to President Biden. They often trailed his. So politically speaking, do you think she's a better candidate than President Biden?
She's a better candidate for some reasons, and the jury's out on others. The reason she's better is she's younger. She'll be more energetic. She'll be able to travel the country and go, barnstorm, not just the target states, but everywhere. So those are all pluses. But when you talk about what happened in Iowa back when, remember there was that first debate, Democratic debate. She did very, very well in. Suddenly, Kamala looked like she could be a shooting star. I mean, she came from nowhere to almost everywhere in that field. Then they had the second debate. And what happened in the second debate, as you may recall, she was the target of fire from Amy Klobuchar and Tulsi and others on that stage, and she withered. She did not do well handling criticism, and she went and fell like a leaden rock and back into anonymity. That is ahead. And think about this. All the events that are unplanned, one or two that are seemingly planned and was just all but confirmed the other day, it looks like there's going to be a Fox News debate in mid-September, September 17th, circle that date, between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And Trump has already said, bring it on, right? Because it's before Fox, you have to assume at least it's going to be, in his mind at least, a more neutral, fair, venue. But the last time that Kamala Harris had to confront somebody, toe-to-toe, where there's going to be a lot of critiques and criticism thrown both ways, she didn't fare well. And despite all the energy and all the enthusiasm Democrats feel for her over President Biden being the candidate, that's where I think the rubber meets the road. Maybe she'll surprise us. Maybe she'll overwhelm us versus what she did before Iowa in that fateful year for her. But I think that is a critical watershed moment in the presidential election to come.
It's really funny because before, when we were talking about debates, when I've had various guests on, everyone says, debates don't really matter until they do matter. President Biden, I mean, that was the kickoff to the end of his campaign. So how important is this debate? Let's say it is with Fox on September 17th, because let's say she doesn't perform well. She can say, hey, it's Fox News.
She could, but the problem, she gets a second first impression. She gets an opportunity to present herself all over again to the American public, this time through the real prism of being the presidential nominee. So she can reset all sorts of expectations, perceptional numbers, etc. If she, again, does better than expected. I think she reaffirms some of the concerns people had about her if she does not, but she's got to do it. And I think, frankly, it's important for the country that they see these two leaders who are bred from incredibly different cloth, right? Up against each other to see what the real difference is in terms of leadership, not just style, but leadership, agenda, where they want to take the country, which gets into the bottom line of this campaign. It's one side wanting this to be a referendum on Donald Trump still. The other side wants this to be a referendum on what's happening in America today. Generally, when you have a square-off like that, if you look at political history, it favors the challenger. In this case, it favors Donald Trump. all the major issues, except for, say, reproductive choice, come his way. The southern border, foreign affairs, the economy, pocketbook economics, all big in favor of Donald Trump. And at the end of the day, Kamala Harris has to figure out a way to explain what is in ways that people feel okay with, to be able to allow Americans to realistically appraise her and assess her as a possible next president of the United States.
It seems like as President Biden's number two, she is inheriting the problems that Biden faced on the campaign trail, sans age of the border. I mean, she's been called border czar. You were in charge of the border.
Right.
This falls on you. She's been getting flack about inflation and the economy. How does she distance herself from President Biden and the administration with just a few months left? Does she have enough runway?
She can't distance herself from that administration. I mean, first of all, President Biden gave her a bear hug, going into this race. So there's no way that she would want to do that, or in fact, they can't do that. But here's what you're going to hear in some fashion. It's going to be San Francisco, Kamala. She's going to be tied to San Francisco, California. All the concerns, Brittany, we heard that if Gavin Newsom had emerged, say as a nominee, the hit would be, well, do you want the rest of America to be run like California? That would have been the referendum on him. Imagine Kamala being tied to San Francisco, which among America's biggest cities is in great disrepair on all sorts of fronts. You're going to hear that very, very soon. And that's another part of, you might say, her record and her background that are going to be coming under assault over the course of the coming weeks.
As we've talked about before, this is an election that comes down to those battleground states. And Emerson College Polling released a new poll, head-to-head matchup between Trump and Harris in some battleground states. And I'll read you the numbers. In Arizona, Trump's up 5. In Georgia, Trump's up by 2. Michigan, Trump's up by 1. Pennsylvania, Trump's up by 2. And Wisconsin, there's a tie. What do you think about these numbers?
They're significant to some extent. First of all, you and I have talked about this before. This isn't a national election. And I'm asking pollsters, how much on the popular vote could President Trump lose by and still win? I think he could almost lose 51-49 roughly and win the presidency. So it's all about the electoral votes and where they are and the swing states. Those numbers are all suggesting, even with Harris's entry into the race and the honeymoon she's on, she still trails. She still has to make up ground. And I think her biggest opportunities are going to be in the South. I think her candidacy might be more appealing in Georgia. It might help take care of a situation that suddenly emerged in Virginia. Last poll had Trump up by 4 in a state Democrats have basically written into their column. North Carolina, again, huge percentages of African-American vote, both North Carolina and Georgia. But I think she's going to have a tougher time, frankly, in the Midwest. I think that with Vance coming onto the ticket, in particular with Donald Trump, I think the media completely missed this. They said, well, gosh, is he too young? Is he too MAGA? He is the personification of the, up from the bootstraps kid who had everything against him. And a lot of people relate to that. He comes from Western Pennsylvania, Ohio. Those people in those regions in the middle, independents, are going to like him and like his story and his grit. So I don't see Kamala naturally appealing to swing voters in the Midwest. So I think she picks up a little bit in the South. She loses more than that, I believe, in the Midwest. And unless she chooses someone like Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, I think both Arizona and Nevada may be out of reach.
So how important then do you think her VP pick is? Because historically, as many people have talked about, VP pick doesn't really help. It can only hurt, doesn't really matter. But this obviously is unprecedented. She just has a few months left. So her picks, her top contenders are apparently all people, middle-aged men from these types of blue or swing states rather. So how important is this pick?
Great question. I'd add one qualifier: middle-aged white men. I mean,
yes.
And what she really, and the Democrats aren't taking advice from me, but my 2 cents to them would be, she needs solidity. she needs a ticket mate who's solid. And the three names getting mentioned the most these days are Cooper from North Carolina, former governor, Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, and Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona. Beshear, I think, is got a future, but Kentucky is a red and it's staying red, and I don't see what his appeal is in bringing in a state. Cooper could certainly help in North Carolina. Mark Kelly, Senator Kelly, could really help her compete in Arizona potentially. That's significant. If there's one state that maybe she's set is on a trajectory to lose that she could compete in, it could be Arizona. And Kelly is, a former astronaut, combat Navy pilot. He's got a great resume and background. His wife was in Congress for many years, was almost taken out, like the President Trump, by an assassin's bullet. So that, I think, could maybe help her. But overall, both the geography of this campaign and even the demographics, Brittany, of this campaign have changed over the last couple of days.
I want to talk about how Republicans changed their message now that Biden's not on the top of the ticket, because last week we saw at the RNC speeches railing against President Biden. Here's how former years of Trump are better than Biden. Now it's not Biden, so he's out of the equation. And we see almost a Republican Party caught flat-footed in this announcement, in this rollout of Kamala Harris. Donald Trump is giving Kamala Harris some nicknames. I don't know how well they're sticking. Lion Kamala, Laughing Kamala. Does their message change now that she is the likely nominee?
Well, you know how in the Republican convention, following on the heels of Butler, Pennsylvania, it was a time where Democrats should just, said to my friends, just sit back, do nothing. Because you can't beat the headlines and what Republicans are going to be controlling for a week. The same thing for Republicans when Kamala Harris suddenly emerged last weekend. Give them a couple days, right? So this whole thing about they don't know what to do, that's not right. They know exactly what to do, but they figure, okay, she's going to get a couple days, the new kid in town, the spotlight's on her, etc. But the race itself is coming down to the same race it was against Joe Biden. Which is a referendum on what is happening in America and to America, some would say, today. That doesn't change with Kamala Harris. It's the same record. It's the same two that brought us, lack of control and chaos on the southern border, pocketbook economics out of control, record inflation, and a lack of adequate response to existential threats abroad. All of those have been on the watch of Biden and Harris. And so Republicans know when they go back to that hallowed ground, and that's what it is in politics, they'll be in very solid ground as they move towards the finish line.
So within the past few weeks, as we've been saying ad nauseum, we have seen so many historical events just in 3 weeks. But are you saying the fundamentals of this election remain the same?
Well, yes and no. The specifics change a little bit in terms of geography, which we talked about. Demography also. I think that Kamala Harris should have more appeal to voters, younger voters under 30. I think she may have less appeal, frankly, to voters over 60. I don't know if that's a wash or not, but that's a changing demographic between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And the geographies we've talked about, that also changes. But the fundamental square off in this election, a referendum on a former president, a referendum on how people feel about what's happening in America today, is the same ball game. And I think it's going to lead to the same result.
So then what are you watching out for between now and the convention, now in the debate, and ultimately now and November?
We're now sitting here at the last part of July. And I'm thinking, gosh, we have 100 days. There'll be 2 or 3 things that may happen, and then we have an election. I'm thinking we're going to have 24 things happen, right, between now and the election. I do know that, as we talked about that debate, if it is locked and loaded, that Fox debate, September 17th, big moment. And then you'll have, President Biden is trying, very, very much trying to bring in a peace formula in the Mideast. So there are other events that the presidency might impact that could help Kamala Harris, or conversely, if there's more eruption on the southern border, that could hurt.
Well, Adam, a lot to look ahead to. And as situations crop up seemingly every day, I hope you come back on soon, join me, discuss them. Adam Goodman, thank you so much.
Great to be with you.